Welcome back to our channel. Think your penny is worthless? Some rare 1-cent coins are selling for thousands. Like and subscribe to see if you have one. In 1972, the United States was in the midst of transition. The Vietnam War was ongoing, Watergate was just beginning to ripple behind the walls of Washington, and the U.S. Mint, as always, was fulfilling its task of producing coins to keep the economy flowing. At the Philadelphia Mint, thousands of Lincoln cents were struck every minute. The classic design, featuring Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse, had been in place since 1959. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The machines ran on schedule. The dies were monitored. But even in a highly regulated system, the margin for error always exists, and sometimes it's that error that creates something extraordinary. The 1972 Lincoln cent wasn't a coin people looked at twice. It was coppery, common, and carried the usual features. In God we trust, liberty. The date 1972, and no mint mark, signifying its origin at the Philadelphia Mint. Millions were made. People pocketed them, ignored them, and eventually spent them without a second thought. But tucked among the countless ordinary pennies was one that bore the mark of imperfection. A flaw so subtle at first glance, yet when observed under the right light, it became impossible to ignore. Years later, a man named Thomas, an amateur coin collector from Kansas, was sorting through his inherited coin jars. His late grandfather had collected Lincoln cents for decades, carefully placing them in old paper rolls and labeling them by year. Most were unremarkable, typical cents from the 60s and 70s, a few wheat pennies, and a handful of steel cents from 1943. But one roll, marked simply 1972p, contained a cent that made Thomas pause. It wasn't the shine that drew him in, it was the doubling. He didn't notice it immediately. The coin had a worn appearance, having clearly been handled over the years. But the letters on the obverse seemed off, thicker, almost as if someone had traced over them with a vibrating hand. He squinted. Liberty looked split. The "In God We Trust" motto appeared shadowed. The date, especially the 9 and the 2, doubled. He fetched a magnifying glass, then a jeweler's loupe. The doubling wasn't due to wear. It was crisp, pronounced, cleanly separated lines alongside each letter and numeral. His pulse quickened. Could it be? He'd heard whispers in online forums of a doubled die from 1972, but had never thought he'd see one. Most doubled dies he'd seen were subtle, only visible under the perfect angle. This one was dramatic. No mint mark. Heavy doubling on the obverse. He cross-referenced the features with what he remembered from numismatic newsletters. It matched perfectly. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, he sent the coin to a grading service, heart pounding with the risk of disappointment. Weeks passed. The envelope returned, thicker than expected. Inside, a hard plastic slab, labeled clearly.
1972 1C Doublet die Obverse FS 101 au 55.
Au 55.
Almost uncirculated. Not mint state but close. His coin was authenticated as one of the rarest varieties of Lincoln cents, double die obverse, listed in the Cherry Picker's Guide as FS 101. Only a few hundred had been confirmed to date in such high quality. Many were lost in circulation. Others went unnoticed, worn down by time. But his had survived, tucked in a roll, sleeping for decades. Collectors began reaching out, quietly at first. A dealer in Arizona offered $17,000. Another in Chicago upped the bid to $10,500. But Thomas, now fully aware of what he held, turned them down. Not out of greed, out of curiosity. What was this coin truly worth? To understand that, he had to look deeper. The 1972 double die wasn't the result of a typical machine misalignment. It came from a faulty die that had been impressed more than once at a slightly different angle. When the die was used to strike coins, every cent bore the effects of that mistake. Most were caught, destroyed, but some slipped through, and of those only a fraction entered circulation. Fewer still survived in a collectible condition. The error wasn't random, it was mechanical, intentional only in its unintentional consequence. Created a coin with two images superimposed, one sharp, the other ghost-like. Unlike machine doubling, where extra lines are flat and shelf-like, this variety had true doubling, raised and distinct. Collectors knew the difference. They paid for the difference. Over time, more examples were confirmed. A few in lower grades, some found in pocket change. Each time one surfaced, the legend grew. Stories appeared in magazines. Videos surfaced of collectors showcasing their finds. But nothing matched Thomas's coin in personal connection. It had come from his grandfather's collection, waiting for him, preserved by time and family. One day, a retired mint employee came forward during a coin expo. He'd worked at the Philadelphia facility in 1972. When he saw Thomas's coin, he nodded and said, "I remember the mess that year. We had one die pair that didn't align correctly. We thought we pulled it in time. Apparently not." The mint never officially documented the error. Only a handful of insiders remembered it at all. That lack of documentation, coupled with the rarity, only added to the coin's mystique. By 2010, market interest in the 1972 double die was surging. One example graded MS-64 red sold for over $14,000. Then came another shock. An uncirculated coin, still with its original red luster, sold for a jaw-dropping $50,000 at auction. Thomas watched as the value climbed with each sale, each confirmation. But he kept his coin. For him, the value wasn't just in the number, it was in the story. Still, he couldn't ignore the reality that the coin was no longer just a collector's oddity. It was now an investment-grade artifact. Then came the twist. During a numismatic exhibition in Denver, a private collector approached Thomas with a request, not to buy the coin but to compare it. The man believed he had found a second, undocumented double die variety from 1972. Similar, but with subtle differences. He wanted Thomas's FS101 for side-by-side comparison. The two coins were laid out under glass, magnified and lit from above. To the untrained eye, they looked identical. But under intense scrutiny, experts noticed differences in the thickness of the R in Liberty and the slant of the 2 in the date. Could it be another variety? A second double die from the same year? The room buzzed with excitement. If true, it could mean the Philadelphia Mint had multiple flawed dies in production that year, further deepening the mystery of how many more might be out there. The experts debated. Some dismissed the second coin as minor doubling. Others weren't so sure. A few called for deeper die analysis and metallurgical tests. But one fact remained undisputed. Thomas's coin was the gold standard, the confirmed FS101, a flawless example of a rare mistake from a chaotic year at the Mint. Its story spread beyond collector circles. It was featured in coin magazines, educational videos, and eventually mainstream media. Viewers were stunned that a humble penny, something so easily overlooked, could hold such hidden value. It became a symbol of overlooked treasures, a reminder that even in the most ordinary objects, extraordinary secrets can hide. Thomas finally decided to insure the coin. The appraisal placed it between $55,000 and $140,000, depending on market demand and auction timing. Some called it a conservative estimate. Others believed it was spot on. But to Thomas, it didn't matter. He kept the coin locked in a safe, occasionally showing it to friends, always telling the same story. The penny no one noticed. The error no one expected. The moment caught forever in copper. In 1982, something unusual happened at the United States Mint. It wasn't an accident or a dramatic equipment failure. It was a deliberate, planned shift. For decades, the US 1-cent penny had been made mostly of copper. But rising metal costs made it increasingly expensive to produce each coin. In response, the Mint made a decision that would ripple through coin collecting history. They changed the metal composition of the penny midway through the year. It was subtle, quiet. There were no news flashes or announcements for the general public. The 1982 penny looked the same on the outside, bearing Abraham Lincoln's familiar profile on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse. The date remained the same, the lettering unchanged. But inside, everything was different. Early in the year, the Mint struck the coins in their traditional composition, 95% copper, 5% zinc. But later, they transitioned to a new planchet made of 99.2% zinc with a thin copper plating. This new penny looked identical to its predecessor but was significantly lighter. And to make things even more complex, the mint struck both large and small date versions that year. That meant multiple combinations of metal content and date styles existed, all sharing a single-year stamp. Millions of these pennies were produced across both the Philadelphia and Denver mints. Most people didn't notice a thing. The copper ones blended with the zinc. The differences were invisible to the naked eye. The coins passed through hands, pockets, vending machines, forgotten drawers. But deep within that swarm of 1982 cents, a mistake took place. Years later, a quiet man named Harold, a coin hobbyist from Michigan, sat in his garage with a box of unsorted pennies. It was something he'd done for years, scanning coins by date, weight, sound. He wasn't a professional, just someone who enjoyed the ritual. But in 2010, as he carefully measured and tapped each 1982 penny across a small digital scale, he paused on one that felt wrong. The coin was dated 1982. It bore no mint mark, meaning it had been struck in Philadelphia. The style was small date, as confirmed under magnification. But the weight didn't match. It read 3.11 grams, too heavy for a zinc penny. Harold knew that copper pennies typically weighed that much. But the small date version from Philadelphia, in copper, that wasn't supposed to exist. He weighed it again. 3.11 grams. The scale was calibrated. He flipped the coin, ran his finger along the edge. It rang differently when dropped. It rang like copper. This was more than a curiosity. It was potentially an error that had escaped the mint during the transition. A small date 1982 cent from Philadelphia struck on the old copper planchet when it should have been on zinc. At first, Harold doubted his find. But after reading numismatic guides and scouring forums, he found only rumors of such a coin existing. Nothing confirmed. Some collectors said it was theoretically possible, if a leftover copper planchet had accidentally been used late in production, but no one he knew had seen one. He sent the coin to a professional grading service. The wait was agonizing. He barely mentioned it to anyone, half afraid the answer would be anticlimactic. Weeks later, the package returned. Inside, protected in a sealed slab, was the verdict: 1982 1C small date copper, transitional error, 58 Australian dollars. The term transitional error changed everything. Coins struck during a change in metal content are among the most prized errors in numismatics. They represent the rare overlap of two production eras. In 1943, the steel cent became infamous. In 1944, some steel planchets mistakenly remained and were struck. Those coins now sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Harold's penny was cut from the same cloth, an overlooked bridge between two worlds. The coin community was stunned. Photos spread across message boards. Collectors speculated wildly. Was Harold's the only one? Were there more out there? Could someone else unknowingly have one in a coffee can or sock drawer? Auction houses reached out. Private collectors sent sealed offers. The first came in at $12,000. Then $25,000. Harold didn't respond. He wanted to understand what he had, not what he could sell. He read everything: mint reports, error coin guides, weight charts, interviews with mint technicians. The more he learned, the clearer it became. His find wasn't just rare. It was nearly unheard of. At coin shows, his slabbed penny was displayed behind thick glass. People came to stare, to ask questions, to take photos. "You're the guy with the 82 Philly copper small date, right?" they'd ask. His quiet nod always led to a dozen more questions. Eventually, the story caught the attention of a former mint employee. She remembered the chaos of 1982, the boxes of mixed planchets, the confusion over large versus small dates, the constant weighing and testing. She confirmed what experts suspected: that leftover copper blanks may have remained in the production line longer than the records admitted. And if one had slipped into the wrong bin, it could have been struck by a small date die. Just once, maybe twice, but not many more. That conversation led to a deeper investigation. A second small date copper 1982 cent from Philadelphia surfaced, this one in a lower grade, VF30. Then another. By 2013, there were 6 known examples. But none were as high grade as Harold's 58 Australian dollars. Most were worn, faded. His was crisp, almost untouched, with detail in the Lincoln portrait and sharpness in the memorial lines. The coin's value rose as interest in transitional errors spiked. Collectors began examining their 1982 cents under magnification. They bought digital scales. They weighed each coin, hoping for that 3.11 gram reading. Most found nothing. A few came close, but only the confirmed few joined Harold's elite list. One day, during a private appraisal at a major numismatic event in Baltimore, an offer came in that gave Harold pause. A collector known for purchasing ultra-rarities laid out a simple proposition: $120,000 cash, delivered discreetly. No auction house, no public fanfare. Harold, as always, declined. Not because he doubted the offer, but because the coin had become more than metal. It was a symbol, a fluke preserved, a mistake that told a story about the changing economics of a nation, the invisible transition hidden in plain sight, and the patience of someone willing to pay attention to what others missed. Years later, the coin remains in his possession. Its value continues to climb as more collectors enter the world of error coins and transitional anomalies. Experts speculate that fewer than 20 Philadelphia small-date copper 1982 cents exist, perhaps fewer than 10 in collectible grades. Harold's coin stands among the best, and today, should it ever go to auction, its estimated value ranges from $48,000 to $125,000 depending on the bidding war it could ignite. But for now, it stays in a drawer lined with velvet, resting inside its transparent shield, glowing with the warmth of copper and the weight of history. The penny that shouldn't exist and yet does. In 1988, the world had its eyes on global change. Whispers of the Cold War's end echoed through political halls, and technology was shifting faster than anyone expected. But inside the Philadelphia Mint, the work continued as it always had. Machines roared, planchets rattled through hoppers, dies slammed with precision, and pennies, millions of them, were struck in that familiar reddish hue, bearing the solemn profile of Abraham Lincoln on one side and the proud image of the Lincoln Memorial on the other. Nothing seemed unusual. The coins passed through the press, slid into bags, and disappeared into the bloodstream of the American economy. The 1988 1-cent penny wasn't expected to be special. It was a standard year, sandwiched between the major design and composition transitions of earlier decades. There were no sweeping announcements.
No commemorative releases.
Just a normal penny, struck mostly from zinc with a thin copper plating. A change that had been implemented back in 1982 due to rising metal costs. Most coins struck that year were flawless to the naked eye. But somewhere in the Philadelphia Mint's daily routine, something unexpected happened. Something tiny, barely visible. And something that wouldn't come to light until years later. In the summer of 2006, a quiet, observant collector named Ethan was sorting through a batch of loose change he'd accumulated from garage sales and thrift store runs. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a few wheat cents, perhaps a 1970 S with a double die, or maybe a misaligned strike. But one coin stopped him. It was a 1988 Lincoln cent. No mint mark, Philadelphia issue. At first glance, it appeared normal. But Ethan had trained his eyes over the years to pick out the slightest oddities. Something about the G in FG, the designer's initials that appeared just to the right of the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse, didn't look quite right. He pulled out a magnifying lens. The G seemed older, shaped differently than other 1988 coins he'd handled. He compared it to other examples. Most 1988 cents featured a more modern G design, part of the engraving done with a master hub introduced a few years earlier. But this one, it matched the style from a 1989 reverse, with subtle curvature and placement that didn't belong to 1988. It didn't make sense. Why would a coin from 1988 have a reverse design meant for 1989? He began researching. Forums, articles, numismatic guides, everything he could find. Eventually, he stumbled across a reference that changed everything. A little-known error, rarely discussed outside tight collector circles. The 1988 Lincoln cent with a reverse of 1989. Not a new design, but a mule. A coin struck with dies that weren't meant to pair together. A mule error, in this case, where the obverse die was from 1988 and the reverse die was an early hub used in 1989 production. The error was barely detectable. known mostly through a single misplaced serif on the G in FG. Ethan's hands trembled. He weighed the coin, 2.5 grams, standard for post-1982 zinc pennies. He rechecked the alignment. Everything else looked perfect. And that was the shocking part. This wasn't a damaged or mangled coin. This was a flawless strike. A clean example of a rare and nearly mythical mule error. He sent the coin for professional grading, fearing rejection, uncertainty, or disappointment. But when it returned, it was sealed and labeled 1988 1C reverse of 1989 FS 901 MS63 red. Confirmation. Not only authentic, but in mint state red condition. The discovery ignited a quiet storm among collectors. A few others surfaced, some in lesser condition, some with more wear. But the number remained remarkably low. Fewer than 24 confirmed examples were catalogued over the next several years, and most were known only by advanced error specialists. Mainstream collectors were mostly unaware. That changed quickly. Coin publications picked up the story. Articles titled The Mule of 1988 and The Reverse That Shouldn't Exist drew curious eyes. The value of these cents began climbing as awareness grew. The error was subtle, only the trained or obsessive would notice it, but that made it even more desirable. It was a reward for those who paid close attention. Auction houses took notice. The first known MS64 red example sold for nearly $20,000 in a private sale. Then another, this time MS65 red, reached $38,000 in open bidding. Demand outpaced supply rapidly, and collectors scoured their hoards of 1988 cents, holding each under magnification, hoping for the elusive reverse. Ethan's coin, meanwhile, became a point of fascination. Experts from grading firms and error specialists praised its clarity and bold strike. Its status as one of the earliest found examples only boosted its appeal. Offers began to flood in. $45,000. $60,000. One private collector even offered $85,000 after flying in to see the coin in person. But Ethan held on. He'd discovered the coin by accident, yes, but it was also the result of years of training his eye, of resisting the urge to rush through rolls and bags. It reminded him that hidden stories live in the smallest corners of history, waiting for someone to notice them. Later, during a coin convention in California, a mint historian gave a quiet talk in a closed session. She'd worked as an archivist and had reviewed old tooling records. She confirmed a long-standing theory. In late 1988, as the mint prepared dies for 1989 production, a few reverse dies meant for the new year were accidentally paired with the outgoing obverse dies. They were supposed to be test strikes, not for circulation. But a few bags made it through, shipped out, unnoticed. This wasn't just a lucky strike. It was a secret that had slipped through the cracks of a system built on precision. And the evidence had been sitting in people's pockets for decades. Today, the 1988 Lincoln cent with the reverse of 1989 remains one of the most prized modern errors in U.S. coinage. The small differences, tiny curves and angles in the initials, are proof of a silent crossover between two minting years. It is a coin that rewards the patient, the meticulous, and the curious. And for those who hold one, the value is no longer theoretical. Auction listings in the last 2 years have pushed its estimated worth between $40,000 and $110,000, depending on condition and strike quality. Coins in MS63 red or higher command the top end of the market, and collectors continue to pay a premium for authenticated examples with strong provenance. As for Ethan, he still keeps the coin in a velvet-lined case inside a climate-controlled safe. He takes it out now and then, not to sell but to remember that sometimes the smallest imperfections, almost invisible, can hold the greatest stories. The 1988 penny that shouldn't have existed, and yet silently did.